The boarding area at Gate C-27 was already humming with that peculiar airport tension, half boredom, half barely contained impatience, when the first raised voice cut through the din. "Sir, I've told you 3 times already. You are not on this flight." The gate agent's voice had that brittle edge of someone who'd had enough. Her name tag read K. Turner. Her blazer was slightly rumpled, her ponytail frizzing at the edges. Screens behind her showed Flight 1789, Atlanta to Washington, D.C., on time. In front of her stood an older black man in a charcoal overcoat, hat tucked under one arm, a leather carry-on at his feet. He was tall but stooped just enough that you could tell his back had known some years. His beard was more silver than black. Deep lines marked the corners of his eyes, but there was nothing frail about the way he stood. His name was Isaiah Coleman. He held out his boarding pass again, not aggressively, not pleading, just steady. "It was on your app. I checked in. Cleared security. They scanned my ID. I'm supposed to be in 3A. His voice was calm, low, with a hint of worn-out patience, like he'd explained this many times today already. Kate Turner snatched the paper from his hand and looked at her monitor again. The glow of it reflected in her glasses, the flicker making her look harsher than she probably knew. "Yeah, I see 3A, she said. "I also see a flag. The system says this reservation is invalid." She looked up at him. "I can't board you." People nearby were starting to pay attention. A family with small kids fell quiet. A businessman in noise-canceling headphones slid one ear cup aside. A young woman in a denim jacket, rolling a hard-shell suitcase, hit record on her phone and angled her camera ever so slightly toward the scene. Isaiah's jaw moved once, twice, as if he were working a piece of gum that wasn't there. "Invalid," he repeated. "I paid for this ticket weeks ago. It's a government fare." "Then take it up with them," she snapped. "I have a plane to board." She reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now pre-boarding for Flight 1789 to Washington, D.C. We'll begin with active duty military and passengers needing additional time or assistance." Her announcement washed over the crowd, but the people closest to the counter weren't listening anymore. Isaiah waited until she put the mic down. "I understand you're busy," he said, voice still even. "But the flight leaves in 32 minutes, and I have to be in D.C. this afternoon. It's important. If there's an issue with the system, I'd appreciate talking to a supervisor." "There's no issue with the system," Turner shot back. "The issue is you trying to use a boarding pass that's been voided." Behind Isaiah, the denim jacket woman whispered into her phone for her followers. I'm at the airport and this is wild." Isaiah frowned. "Voided by whom?" She shrugged. "Doesn't say. Just says invalid, do not board." "Could you please not say that so loudly?" he replied, glancing at the widening ring of onlookers. "You're making it sound like I'm trying to pull something." A man in a suit 2 passengers away muttered, "Might be. Can never be too careful." Isaiah heard it. His eyes flicked that direction and then back. Turner folded her arms. "So, if you want to get rebooked, you need to step aside so I can keep boarding everyone else. Right now, you're holding up the line." "I'm not asking to hold up the line. I'm asking you to look again." He tried to keep the weariness out of his voice and mostly succeeded. The hum of baggage roller wheels, the beeps of scanners, and the chatter of boarding announcements from nearby gates filled the space around them. Turner's lips thinned. "Fine." She pulled the boarding pass closer, eyes narrowing as she scanned the seat number, the barcode, his name, Coleman Isaiah. Then, with a small, sharp motion that felt louder than it was, she tore the boarding pass in half. The rip of paper snapped the air. Gasps broke out around them. Isaiah didn't flinch. His gaze moved from the dangling halves of paper back up to her face, and something in his posture changed. Not a big thing, just a shift, a straightening of the shoulders that made him seem suddenly taller. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. A teenage boy nearby whispered, "Yo," under his breath as his phone camera zoomed in. "Yes, I did," Turner said, louder now, double-aimed at him and at the audience she suddenly knew she had. "I'm following procedure. We don't allow fraudulent documents on our flights. Security will be here in a moment to talk to you." "Fraudulent," someone repeated from the crowd. Isaiah's fingers tightened around the handle of his carry-on. For a second, his face betrayed something. Hurt, maybe. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a stillness that made him seem carved out of something heavier than flesh. "I'm not moving," he said. "I'm supposed to be on that plane. I've cleared every checkpoint you people put in front of me. I'm not leaving this gate because your computer made a mistake." Tana leaned forward, lowering her voice, although the MIC still picked up a bit of it. "So, if you don't step aside, I will consider you a disruption, and airport security will escort you away. Do you understand?" Phones were up now, 3, 4, 8 of them. Some were held low, pretending not to film. Others were unapologetically raised. At the far edge of the area, 2 uniformed airport police officers began walking toward the gate. Isaiah saw them coming. His eyes flickered once down to his own coat pocket, where something flat and leather pressed against his chest. He took a breath, long and measured, the kind you learn to take when everyone around you is reacting and you know that you, only you, have to stay cool. "All right," he murmured, almost to himself. "Then we'll do it this way." He reached into his coat, not fast, not jerky, just deliberate, and the denim jacket woman's live stream chat blew up. He reaching for something, someone hissed. The officer's hands shifted on their belts. Isaiah's fingers closed around the badge he had hoped he wouldn't need to show today. And as his hand came out of his coat, as the glint of metal began to show, as every phone at Gate C27 zoomed in, it was suddenly very clear that everything in this gate area, and for one particular airline, was about to flip upside down. 10 hours earlier, before his name was being murmured through a dozen live streams, Isaiah Coleman sat at his kitchen table, carefully polishing the same badge now warming his chest. The modest house in southwest Atlanta was quiet, save for the fridge humming and an old clock ticking on the wall. The morning light slanted across the table, catching the edges of framed photographs. Isaiah in a younger man's suit shaking hands with a judge, Isaiah standing with a group of law students, all of them grinning. Isaiah holding a newborn, his daughter, wrapped in a hospital blanket. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, suspenders hanging loose. His reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. In front of him lay a thick manila folder, corners worn soft with handling. On the folder, U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of Civil Rights, Airline Access Task Force. His phone buzzed beside the folder. A text from his daughter, Joy. "You at the airport yet? Don't let them stress you today, Daddy. Red hot hash." He smiled, thumb hovering over the screen to respond, then deciding to call instead. "Hey, baby," he said when she picked up. "Hey," came her voice, sleepy but warm. "You packing?" "Already packed. Just checking everything one more time." He glanced at the badge in his hand, then at the letter tucked inside the folder, printed on thick government letterhead, signed by an undersecretary. They moved up the briefing. "I need to be in the building by 3. "For the airline case?" she asked. "For all of them," he said. "But yay, this particular airline is going to be a big part of the conversation today." He could almost hear her eyebrow go up. "The one I always tell my friends not to fly." "That's the one." Joy said. "So are you the hammer or just the guy holding it?" He chuckled. "I'm the one reminding everyone what the hammer is for." He'd spent 30 years as a civil rights attorney, first in nonprofits, then at the Department of Justice, and now at the Department of Transportation. His current job title was long enough to not fit neatly on any business card: Senior Special Counsel for Aviation Access and Equity. He was, in federal speak, the man you called when airlines treated people the way airlines weren't supposed to treat them. Disabled passengers left stranded, families separated, black and brown travelers singled out for extra screening that never seemed to land on anybody else. In the file on his table were printouts of complaints, emails, handwritten letters, videos linked by URL and burned onto disks. Stories of people removed from planes for looking suspicious, told they smelled, told their clothes were inappropriate, told dogs couldn't fly in cabins even when the law said they could. Stories with a pattern. "We got new numbers last week," Isaiah told his daughter. Guess which demographic is still most likely to get randomly pulled from boarding or bumped from a flight altogether once they show up at the gate? She sighed. You don't have to say it. Don't, but I will. Black passengers. Over and over. That's why they asked you to lead the task force, right? She said. Because you don't get tired. Isaiah laughed softly, rubbing a thumb along the badge. I do get tired. I just don't stop. He'd come from a different Atlanta, the one with separate water fountains when he was a boy, the one where his mother ironed shirts in white folks' kitchens and his father came home from the post office with stories about which neighborhoods you drove through and which you did not. He still remembered, as if it were yesterday, the first time he'd flown. He'd been 19, a scholarship kid at Morehouse, heading to a summer program in Boston. It was 1976, and he'd never been on a plane before. He put on his best shirt, slacks, and the only tie he owned. At the gate, the agent had looked him over, eyes lingering on his face, then his shoes, and asked for his ID twice. Then again when he stepped onto the jet bridge. Just procedure, she'd said, not unkindly. On the return flight, another agent had double-checked his ticket, and a security guard had trailed behind him as he walked through the terminal. It's the way they look at you, he told his roommate later. Like they're sure you don't belong. And if they stare hard enough, maybe you won't. That feeling never quite left, even after 3 decades and more flights than he could count, even after the badges and titles started accumulating. Maybe that was why he'd taken this assignment when other men his age were retiring. I have to be there today, he told Joy. We're laying groundwork for enforcement. Real teeth. Fines big enough that it's not just cost of doing businesses anymore. And policies, she asked. And policies, he agreed. Training. Audits. Mechanisms for passengers to report gate-level incidents in real time. Not just when some manager decides it's worth writing down. Maybe one day airlines will stop acting like airports are their little kingdoms, she murmured. He smiled. If we do this right, they're going to understand those kingdoms on borrowed land. You sound fired up, Daddy. Maybe I am. He glanced at the files. You know what the part is that always gets me? What? In these stories, the passenger always starts off so small. His voice softened. They're just trying to get home, get to a funeral, make a job interview, go on a honeymoon, and then they end up humiliated in front of 100 strangers because one person behind a counter and a system behind that person decided they were a problem. He could feel his throat tighten, unexpected, and they start wondering if maybe they did something wrong just by existing, he said. That's what I'm tired of. Joy was quiet for a moment. You go in there and make them listen, she said finally. And text me when you land. No hero stuff in the airport, okay? No hero stuff, he promised, a little smile tugging his lips. He ended the call, slipped his badge into its leather case, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat. Then he picked up the manila folder, slid it into his briefcase, and headed for the door. On the passenger manifest for Flight 1789, a name sat in Seat 3A. Coleman Isaiah. Beside it, a note, .gov Fair, Civil Rights, Level 2 Clearance. Far away in some airline server farm, software cross-checked that information against another data stream, one fed by a private contractor's risk algorithms, pattern matching, flagging, color coding. A tiny line of code, written months ago by someone who would never see the inside of Gate C27, triggered a new label. Account, anomaly. Review. It was one of hundreds that day, and like most, it should have been resolved by an automated reconciliation process. But a system update the previous night had introduced a glitch. By the time Isaiah's Uber pulled up to Hartsfield-Jackson, the process that should have cleared his reservation back to normal had failed silently. In its place, on the gate agent screen, a red warning box waited beside his name. Invalid. Do not board. Contact security if passenger presents for flight. Back at gate C27, the security officers closed the remaining distance. One was tall and broad, his uniform straining slightly at the shoulders. The other was shorter but with the alert eyes of someone who'd seen most of the tricks people tried in airports. Problem here? The taller one asked, his tone professional but edged with that weary expectation that yes, there was always a problem. Turner lifted her chin. This gentleman is attempting to board with a voided ticket. When I informed him he wasn't in the system and asked him to step aside, he refused. He's disrupting the boarding process. The officer looked at Isaiah. Sir. Isaiah considered them for a heartbeat, his hand still in his coat, fingers resting on the cool oval of his badge. Behind him, murmurs fluttered like restless birds. He ripped his boarding pass, someone whispered. No, she did. She said fraudulent documents. That's messed up, man. The denim jacket woman, whose live stream was now pushing past 1,000 live viewers, whispered into her phone. Okay, it's escalating. Security is so calm though. I feel like my heart is beating out my chest and I'm just watching. Isaiah let the swell of other people's noise pass over him. Officers, he said, finally taking his hand away from his coat. He didn't reveal anything. Not yet. I'm not trying to disrupt anything. I'm trying to get on the flight I paid for so I can do my job. This agent, he gestured toward Turner without looking at her, says my ticket is invalid and tore it up in front of me. You can't just tee up somebody's. The businessman nearby started, then stopped as Turner glared at him. Sir, the taller officer said, addressing Isaiah, we're going to ask you to step over here so we can sort this out. All right. Isaiah's eyes drifted to the departure board, where his flight number glowed in crisp white letters. He had spent a lifetime being asked to step over here so other people could sort out their comfort. He inhaled again, slow, deliberate. I'll answer your questions right here, he replied. In front of these folks. I have nothing to hide. The shorter officer shifted his weight. So, we're trying to keep this from turning into a bigger situation. Work with us. Oh, it is already a bigger situation, said the woman in denim, half to herself, half to her phone. We're worldwide now. The officer shot her a look. Miss, I'm going to ask you not to film this interaction. She lifted her chin. I'm on public property and he hasn't asked me to stop, she said. Have you, sir? She added, looking at Isaiah. Isaiah looked at all the lenses pointed his way. He saw, for a flickering second, a boy version of himself standing in an airport for the first time, watched by eyes that said he did not belong. No, he said, I haven't. That one word felt like a small, quiet door swinging open. The gate area seemed to tilt. More phones came up. Turner flushed. You can't just let everyone record, she said quickly, to the officers. We have privacy rules. You're in a public-facing role, someone said from the back. What privacy? Let us handle this, the taller officer told her. He turned back to Isaiah. I'm going to ask you again. Please come with us to the side. If you refuse, we may have to consider you non-compliant. That can carry consequences. Charges. You don't want that. A black man refusing to move where he's told at an airport, someone muttered. We know how that goes. Laughter, bitter and sharp, rippled through the crowd, quickly swallowed by a hush. Isaiah felt the old familiar anger stirring in his chest, that coiled, burning thing that had carried him through marches and hearings and depositions. That anger had a sharp edge, a tempting one. He chose, instead, to let something else rise, the kind of focus he cultivated in courtrooms and negotiation tables. Officers, he said quietly, what's your understanding of why I'm being asked to move from this public gate area? You're obstructing the boarding process, the taller one replied. And the agent is saying you presented a voided document. That can be fraud. Do you know if that's true? Isaiah asked, his voice still even. The officer hesitated. That's what we were told. Have you seen any documentation from me other than the boarding pass she tore up? No, sir. Well, that's interesting, Isaiah said, and this time there was the slightest hint of steel in his tone. Because right now, there are three things in this space. A man in an airport trying to get to his seat, an employee following whatever a glitchy system tells her, and a whole lot of people with phones. A chuckle broke from someone in the back. Others stayed dead silent, sensing something shift. Isaiah looked from one officer to the other. I'm not going to raise my voice, he said. I'm not going to make any sudden moves. But I'm going to assert my right to know exactly why I'm being threatened with removal. The shorter officer opened his mouth, then closed it. Yeah, ask that question, a woman called from a row of seats. Ask them. Turner's cheeks were now fully flushed. You're making a scene, sir, she snapped. If you'd just gone with them, we could have already rebooked you for another flight. To when? Isaiah asked. She typed rapidly, glanced at the screen. Tomorrow morning. A wave of outraged groans rolled through the listening crowd. Tomorrow, someone repeated. He paid for first class and you're kicking him to tomorrow. You can give my seat, a younger man in a Braves hoodie blurted. If that's the issue, put him in my seat. I'll take whatever. Turner looked thrown. We can't just, sir. That's not how the system works. No, that's exactly how it could work if you cared, the man shot back. The denim jacket woman panned her phone around the gate to capture faces, angry, upset, curious, and then back to Isaiah. People in the comments scrolled by in a blare. OMG, this is giving you don't belong here vibes. He's so composed, I'd be yelling by now. Tag the airline. Tag the DOT. This gonna end in a lawsuit. Watch. Isaiah rolled his shoulders, the air around him practically vibrating now with tension. He looked at Turner, at the officers, at the little universe of Gate C-27 with its boarding signs and plastic seats and tired travelers. Then he sighed, a slow, deep exhale, like a man letting go of one thing so he could pick up another. All right, he said again, this time loud enough for everyone to hear. You'll want to talk about documents. Let's talk about documents. He reached into his coat once more. This time, he pulled out the badge. It caught the fluorescent light and flashed. A hush fell over the gate area so suddenly it was like someone had hit mute on the world. Turner blinked. The taller officer's face changed in an instant, a subtle but undeniable shift from authoritative to wary. The camera lenses zoomed in. On the badge gleamed an unmistakable seal of the United States. Isaiah held it up not like a weapon, but like an answer. My name, he said, his voice carrying clear and steady through the charge, is Isaiah Coleman. I am Senior Special Counsel for Aviation Access and Equity with the U.S. Department of Transportation. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the title ripple out into the ranks of the standing, watching crowd. And I flew here, he continued, on your airline, Ms. Turner, to attend a federal meeting in Washington, D.C., concerning discriminatory denial of boarding by airline gate personnel. A beat of stunned silence. Then everything began to change at once. For a moment, no one moved. The badge hung in the air between them, shining like a small, harsh sun. Turner stared at it, her eyes darting between the engraved seal and Isaiah's calm face. Her mouth opened, then shut. The taller officer cleared his throat. Sir, can I see that more closely? Of course, Isaiah said. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, one hand holding the badge, the other open and empty at his side. Every phone camera followed that movement, tracking the tiny choreography of power shifting. He held the badge out. The officer took it with both hands, as if suddenly aware that this was not just a piece of metal but a symbol with weight. The officer read the engraving, lips moving silently. His brows went up. He flipped it over, reading the ID on the back, then looked at Isaiah again with a new kind of appraisal. This looks authentic, he said quietly. It is, Isaiah replied. May I? The officer gestured toward the folded letter peeking out of Isaiah's inner pocket. Isaiah nodded, drawing it out carefully. He unfolded the document and held it open so both officers could read. The bold heading bore the department name. The language below was dense and formal, but one part stood out. To address alleged discriminatory conduct by airline personnel against passengers of color and other protected groups. Near the bottom, in stark black ink, was the line. Lead, Senior Special Counsel Isaiah L. Coleman. The shorter officer's eyes flitted from the letter to the torn halves of Isaiah's boarding pass on the counter, to Turner, whose complexion was shifting toward a sickly shade. Ms. Turner, Isaiah said gently, did you not see any notes attached to my reservation? She tapped at her keyboard with frantic fingers. It just said invalid and do not board. I swear, that's all it said. Did you think it might be a mistake? He asked. She swallowed. The system doesn't usually make mistakes like that. Soft laughter, humorless, rolled through the crowd. Isaiah's gaze didn't harden. If anything, it grew softer, which somehow made it all the more devastating. "How many times today," he asked quietly, "have you seen that same red box next to someone's name?" She opened her mouth, hesitated, then, "A few." "A few," he repeated. "And how many of them looked like me?" The question hung there. Turner's eyes glistened. She did not answer. Isaiah nodded once, as if that silence was an answer of its own. Behind him, the denim jacket woman whispered, "Oh, his cooking," into her phone. Her livestream comments were exploding. "He works for the dot." Not them harassing the guy who came to fix the very thing they doing skull. "Tag your congressman." One of the officers handed the badge back, more carefully this time. I'm going to call a supervisor," the taller one murmured, already reaching for his radio. "You do that," Isaiah said. "And while you're at it, maybe get someone from your airline's corporate side on the line too." Turner flinched. Isaiah turned to face the crowd. To his own surprise, he felt no triumph, no sense of gotcha. Just a deep, tired sorrow and a responsibility that settled heavier on his shoulders than his overcoat. "I want all of you to keep recording," he said calmly. "Please." A murmur of surprise rippled through the group. "This is not about me getting to D.C.," he went on. "I'll get there. This is about what just happened being seen. It's about every person who doesn't have a badge to pull out when they are told they don't belong." He let that sit. At the edge of the gate area, a woman in a navy suit with an airline ID hurried up, eyes wide. A duty manager. Her tablet was already in her hand. "What's going on here?" she asked, slightly out of breath. Turner started speaking rapidly, words tumbling over themselves. "There was an invalid ticket," the system said. Isaiah raised a hand slightly. "Before you say anything," he interrupted, "take a look at this." He handed over the letter. She scanned it, eyebrows rising with each line she read. When she got to his name, her head snapped up. "You're—" "Yes," he said. "I am." Her gaze flicked to the streaming phones, then to the officers, then back to Isaiah. The manager straightened, forcing a professional smile onto her face. "Mr. Coleman," she said quickly, "I am so sorry for any inconvenience you've experienced. This appears to be a miscommunication. I'm sure we can get this smoothed out immediately." "Oh, I have no doubt you're going to try," he responded mildly. "We'll reissue your boarding pass right now." "And—" "No," he said. The word was polite, even quiet, but it landed like a stone dropped in water. "No," she repeated, thrown. "No," Isaiah said. "Not until we talk about what your system told your employee to do, and why she was so quick to assume I was the problem." The manager's eyes flicked nervously toward the phones. "Mr. Coleman, with all due respect, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," he cut in. "This is where it happens. Right here, at the gate. Not in polished boardrooms or carefully worded press releases. Here, with one person behind a counter and another on the wrong side of it." He motioned around them. "These people," he said, "are going to board this flight and go home or go to work and tell their families about what they saw. Some are going to post about it. Some already are. That is exactly the point." The manager's jaw clenched. "Maybe we could step aside and discuss." "No," he repeated. "I don't want a quiet conversation in a corner office that never sees the light of day. I want accountability in the same space where the harm happened." Someone in the back started clapping. It spread, hesitant at first, then more confident. The manager held up a hand. "Okay," she said, forcing calm. "Here's what I can do. We'll get you on this flight, in your original seat. I'll personally file a report on this incident with corporate, and we'll make sure." "This is not about a free upgrade or an apology," Isaiah said gently. "I'm already in first class. It doesn't get much higher than that on your aircraft." A few people chuckled bitterly. "What I want," he continued, "is to know what your airline is going to do when the person being labeled invalid doesn't have 3 decades in civil rights law and a federal badge." The manager swallowed. "Because if your system flagged my account this easily," Isaiah went on, "it's flagging others. probably every day. And I'm going to ask, on record, right now, what mechanisms you have in place to catch those errors before someone gets humiliated at this counter. He turned slightly, addressing not just her but the phones, the crowd, the unseen audience spilling out into the digital ether. And I want to know, he said, voice thickening just a little, how often those errors seem to land on people who look like me. No one spoke. Even the overhead announcements from other gates seemed softer suddenly, distant. The manager's eyes flickered with calculation, legal risk, PR disaster, logistics. Mr. Coleman, she said finally, I understand your concerns. I really do. And I'm sure our corporate office will be eager to address them with you directly. But right now, I have a flight to board. If you would allow us to reissue your boarding pass. And if I say no, he asked, then we'll have to rebook you, she replied, voice tight. And I'll note that you refused transport when offered. The phones caught that sentence, every word. Isaiah inhaled sharply, as if stung. Refused transport, he repeated slowly. That's what you'll write. It's the terminology we use, she said, but her tone had lost some confidence. He nodded, as if making a note, for later, the kind that showed up in long, dry reports with serious recommendations at the end. Go ahead and reissue it, he said at last. I will get on that plane. But understand this. He stepped closer, so that only a small armrest separated him from the counter. I came here today prepared to talk about patterns and policies and statistical disparities, he said. What I didn't expect was to experience, in real time, the very thing I'm supposed to address. He glanced at the crowd again, at the phones capturing every nuance of his face. I'm not going to raise my voice, he repeated, quieter now. I'm not going to curse or threaten. I'm simply going to say this. The days of things like this happening in the dark are over. Every gate is a stage now. Every phone is a spotlight. He looked back at her. And I have a bigger spotlight waiting for me in D.C., he finished. The manager's composure cracked just a hair. I will personally ensure a full review of this incident, she managed. He nodded once. I look forward to reading it, he said, and to seeing your airline at our next hearing. The flight eventually boarded, though not on time. Whispers followed Isaiah all the way down the jet bridge. That's him. That's the guy from the video. He works for the government, right? A little girl clutched her mother's hand and looked up at him with big eyes as he passed. Are you in trouble? She asked. He paused, the weight of the day settling on him. Not the kind that matters, he said gently. Are you? She shook her head, curls bouncing. Then we're good, he said, offering her a small smile. In 3A, the flight attendant, a young man with careful hair and eyes that looked genuinely rattled, met him with a nervous half-bow. Mr. Coleman, he said, on behalf of the airline, I just wanted to say. Isaiah raised a hand. Son, I don't need an apology from you, he said. Just treat folks right. I try, the flight attendant said softly. I know, Isaiah replied. And he did know. Systems and policies and data flows were 1,000 miles above this young man's pay grade. As the flight took off, phones buzzed all over the cabin, notifications chiming in stuttering waves. In row 21, the woman in the denim jacket smiled as her follower count ticked up by the hundreds. Her video, titled They Mess with the Wrong Granddad at the Gate, had just jumped platforms. Someone had clipped Isaiah's badge reveal and his quiet remarks and posted them on another app with the caption, Gate agent rips up black old man's boarding pass. Then he calmly reveals his federal badge. By the time Flight 1789 wheels left the ground, the clip had crossed 1 million views. By the time it touched down in D.C., the airline's social media team was already in full scramble mode. The consequences did not come all at once, and they did not come only from one direction. They came in waves. First came the angry posts, then the think pieces. The video of the scene at Gate C-27 was shared and reshared, duetted and stitched, remixed with commentary ranging from outrage to weary to bitterly funny. There is nothing, said one creator, an activist with a large following, more American than an old black man having to pull out federal credentials just to be treated like a human being at the airport. Hashtag sprouted, Gate C27, boarding while black, DOT on the dot. The airline's initial response was bland and careful. We are aware of a video circulating involving one of our agents and a customer. We take these allegations seriously and are looking into the matter. The comments beneath filled with scorn. Looking into the matter. Translation. They are hoping we forget. You'll really pick the one dude whose actual job is investigating y'all. Stock analysts noticed the spike in negative mentions. It was a blip, at first, but when a whistleblower from inside the airline quietly leaked that the error originated from a risk algorithm some in the C-suite had raised concerns about months ago, the story deepened. Articles surfaced about predictive systems flagging certain names, certain demographics, certain travel patterns at disproportionately higher rates. Old complaints, buried in bureaucracy, were unearthed by reporters. Patterns crystallized. Passengers of color denied boarding after minor system flags, then marked as non-compliant when they protested. In conference rooms with blackout curtains and too bright projectors, executives stared at charts showing sentiment graphs plunging and call center volume spiking. Who signed off on this contractor? One demanded. You did, someone muttered. In a smaller room, HR had quieter conversations. The emails went out with subject lines like administrative leave pending investigation. Turner sat on the edge of her bed at home, phone in one hand, the other pressed against her forehead as if she could keep her thoughts from spilling out. She'd watched the video, of course. She'd watched herself tearing up that boarding pass, watched the angle the cameras caught where her mouth turned down, watched Isaiah's calm, watched the badge. In the comments, strangers called her a monster, a racist, a symptom, a scapegoat, a victim of bad training, a villain. Her sister texted, "You okay?" And she didn't know how to answer. Because no, she wasn't. And yet in the raw, defensive part of her heart, she also thought, the screen said invalid. I was just doing my job. She replayed the moment he asked how many red flags she'd seen that day. How many of those people looked like him? She thought of 3, then 5, then more. Faces she told herself she was just following procedure with. The airline suspended her pending investigation. Her union rep called, telling her not to talk to the media. Her rent came due anyway. On the other side of the country, investors dialed into a quarterly earnings call and asked the CEO what the company was doing to address the social media incident. The CEO recited phrases written by legal and PR. We're reviewing our policies. We're committed to equity. This does not reflect our values. Meanwhile, at the Department of Transportation, Isaiah sat at a long table under harsh lights, with a microphone angled at his mouth and a nameplate in front of him. In the weeks since the gate incident, his life had become a strange blend of the familiar and the newly public. He'd testified at hearings before, but never with millions of strangers having already seen him in a vulnerable moment at an airport. He adjusted his glasses, the murmur in the room settling as the chair recognized him. Mr. Coleman, a senator said, "We've all seen the video. We've heard statements from the airline. Today, we'd like to hear from you. What, in your view, does this incident reveal about the state of air travel for marginalized communities in this country?" Every camera in the room focused on him. He took his time before answering. "There's a temptation," he began, "to treat what happened at Gate C27 as an anomaly. A glitch, a one-off incident caused by a bug in a system and an employee having a bad day." He looked down the line of lawmakers, then beyond them, in his mind, to the countless passengers who'd sent complaints that hadn't gone viral. "But the truth," he continued, "is that what happened that day was not unique. The only unusual thing about it was who I am and what I happen to do for a living." He folded his hands on the table. "If you take away the federal badge," he said, "if you strip away the title and the meeting I was rushing to, you are left with a very familiar story. A black man being told, in a public place, that he is not valid, that he does not belong, that his documentation, his word, his presence are suspect." He thought of the boy he'd been, walking through airports for the first time, feeling eyes on him. "This happens," he said, "at front desks and store counters and traffic stops and, yes, at boarding gates. Over and over. People get flagged by systems that are supposed to be neutral but are trained on biased data. And then those flags land in the hands of human beings who bring their own assumptions, their own fears, their own unconscious prejudices to the interaction. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the sting of them do its work. The gate agent who tore up my pass, he said, did not wake up that morning and say, I'm going to deny boarding to a civil rights lawyer. She woke up and went to a job where a screen told her that certain kinds of passengers were more likely to be trouble. And those passengers started to look very similar after a while. He leaned slightly toward the microphone. This is not about one bad actor, he said. This is about a system. And systems do not change because we feel sorry. They change because we hold institutions accountable, legally, financially, and culturally, when they fail to protect the dignity of the people they save. On a different floor in the same building, attorneys were already drafting a consent decree. It would require the airline to overhaul its flagging systems, submit to third-party audits, and retrain all customer-facing staff. It would require data reporting broken down by race, gender, disability, and other factors for every denied boarding and security referral. There would be fines if they didn't comply. Not token ones. Fines big enough to make shareholder letters sweat. The airline's stock dipped, then steadied, then dipped again as the story unfolded. For Tona, the fallout was quieter but no less real. In the end, her termination letter cited violation of customer service protocols and behavior not in line with company values. She stared at those phrases for a long time, knowing some of them were true and some were too neat to touch the messy reality. What am I supposed to do now? She whispered to her empty apartment. No one answered. Months later, the world had moved on, as it always did, to newer outrages, fresher scandals. But not everything went back to the way it had been. At Gate C27, a new training poster hung inside the staff area where agents clocked in. It was part of a company-wide initiative launched under the watchful eye of DOT and a very unamused committee in Congress. The poster listed steps for handling system flags, but also listed rights for passengers. It stressed de-escalation, second looks, discretion. It had a line in bold. These flags are a tool, not a verdict. You are accountable for how you use them. New software updates rolled out across the airline systems. The risk algorithm that had quietly red-flagged certain names was replaced with one that had been audited for bias. A human check was required before any do not board label could be applied. In training videos, actors played out scenarios at gates. In one, an agent was about to deny boarding to a passenger based solely on a red warning box. A trainer paused the video and asked the trainees, "What could you do differently here?" A second, corrected version showed the agent asking questions, double-checking, calling a supervisor before making decisions that carried heavy consequences. At one of these sessions, a new hire raised her hand and said, "Is this because of that guy from the internet?" And the trainer replied, "It's because of that guy and every person who didn't have a camera on when it happened to them." In a quiet community center 10 miles from the airport, Tona stacked metal chairs after a meeting of a job-hunting group. She'd found work there after months of searching. It didn't pay much, but it was something. One evening, as she wiped down a table, she overheard a group of young men discussing travel plans. "You see that vid from months ago?" one of them said. "The old dude with the badge at the gate." "Yeah, that was crazy." "I was like, that could have been my uncle," another said. Turner froze, fingers still on the damp cloth. She deleted most social media, but you couldn't exist in her city and not know about that video. She swallowed, listening. "Good for him, though," the first young man said. Like, he was calm, but he didn't back down. "That's how you do it." Turner let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He shouldn't have had to do it at all," she murmured, surprising herself by speaking up. The young men glanced over. "You seen it?" one asked. She met their gazes and, for the first time in months, didn't dodge. "I was there," she said quietly, on the other side of the counter. They stayed, unsure if she was joking. "You were the one," started, then stopped, unsure how to phrase it without being rude. She gave him a tired half-smile. "I was the one who tore up his boarding pass," she said. Silence. Then, quietly, "Damn." She nodded. "Yeah, damn." One of the young men shifted awkwardly. "So, Like, do you regret it? The question was simple. The answer was not. She took a long time before replying. I regret what it meant, she said finally. I regret that I didn't stop and ask myself why I trusted the red box on the screen more than the person in front of me. I regret that I was more worried about getting the flight out on time than about whether I was hurting someone. Her voice wobbled on the last words. The young men looked at each other, at her. But I also think, she added, slowly, that if all we do is point fingers and say bad apple, nothing changes. I wasn't the first. I won't be the last. This is bigger than me. They nodded. You think he'd want to hear that? One of them asked. She thought of Isaiah, dignified even when wronged, voice steady in the face of all those cameras. I don't know, she said. But I think people like him. They're fighting so people like us don't keep making the same mistakes. In Washington, at a podium in a modest hall, Isaiah stood once more before a smaller crowd than the hearings, but one that felt more important to him. Community leaders, youth groups, church members, union representatives. The viral moment had passed. The world was less interested in the man from Gate C-27 now that the drama was over. That suited him fine. He cleared his throat. I've been asked a lot, he began, how it felt, in that moment, to pull out my badge. A small ripple of knowing laughter passed through the room. Some folks expected me to say it felt good, he went on. That I felt vindicated. Powerful. He shook his head. But the truth is, what I felt was sad, he said. Because in that moment, I realized that the only reason that story ended the way it did for me is that I had access to something most people don't. A symbol that made the system turn on its heel and reconsider me. He rested his hands on the podium. What about the woman flying home from her father's funeral who gets told her ticket isn't valid and has to sleep on airport chairs? What about the young man on his way to a job interview who gets escorted away by security in front of everyone and labeled non-compliant in a file somewhere? They don't have a badge. He paused, looking out over the crowd, meeting eyes where he could. If the system only behaves when someone with a certain title is watching, he said slowly, then we do not have justice. We have performance. He let that land. So, what do? He continued. We hold these companies accountable, not just with angry tweets, but with policies, with regulations, with consequences that cost money and force change. We demand transparency about how algorithms flag us, how decisions get made. He took a breath. But we also look inward, because systems are built and run by people. The agent at that gate, the officer who approached me, the engineer who wrote that code, they all carry their own biases, their own pressures. Some of them look like the folks they hurt. Some don't. He leaned forward slightly. We cannot fix what we refuse to see in ourselves, he said. Every time we're behind a counter, holding a clipboard, writing code, wearing a uniform, or just standing in a crowd watching someone be humiliated, we have a choice. He tapped the podium lightly. Do we default to fear? He asked. To stereotypes? To whatever is easiest? Or do we slow down, look people in the eye, and ask, is this right? A soft murmur of agreement filled the room. I am not interested in revenge, Isaiah said. I am interested in responsibility. I don't want that gate agent's life ruined. I want her to understand what that moment meant. I don't want the airline destroyed. I want it transformed so that a child can walk through those gates without bracing for suspicion. He straightened. Dignity is not a perk to be granted, he said, his voice strong now. It is a baseline. Accountability is not cruelty. It is care for the community. And kindness is not weakness. It is the courage to see someone fully and treat them as you would want someone to treat your own father, your own child, your own self. He glanced down at the badge at his belt, then back up. I will keep using whatever authority I've been given to push for that, he finished. But I can't do it alone. This is bigger than one gate, one flight, one viral moment. It's about who we are when no one is filming, and who we are when everyone is. The applause that followed wasn't wild or frenzied. It was steady, the sound of people recognizing something true and heavy and needed. After the event, a line formed to speak with him. He listened to story after story, some eerily similar to his own, others different but with the same echo of being made small. He went home that night tied to his bones, but also oddly at peace. The next time he flew out of Atlanta, months later, the check-in process was blessedly uneventful. At the gate, a young agent scanned his boarding pass, hesitated for a split second when something flashed on the screen, then frowned, tapped a few keys, and smiled. "System flagged something, but looks like it cleared itself," she said. "You're all set, Mr. Coleman. Thanks for your patience." He studied her face, her name tag. "Thank you," he said. As he walked away, he glanced back and saw the poster in the staff area. Bold letters, a reminder that screens didn't absolve anyone of responsibility. He settled into his seat and looked out the window at the tarmac. The world was still imperfect, still unfair in 1,000 ways. People would still be profiled, still be treated as less than, still be told they didn't belong. But there were cracks in the armor now, places where light could get through. He thought of Turner, wherever she was, hopefully learning, hopefully growing. He thought of the denim jacket woman, using her platform to amplify stories beyond the algorithm's appetite for spectacle. He thought of the young gate agent who'd overridden the system and, maybe, didn't even realize she'd just done something quietly radical. The plane pushed back from the gate. As it did, Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment, not in resignation, but in a brief, wordless prayer for courage, in himself, in those who'd watch and act, in those who'd have to learn. Not far away, at another gate, a minor dispute was unfolding. A tired agent, a flustered passenger, a small misunderstanding. This time, the agent took a breath, asked one more question, double-checked the screen before reaching for the pass. This time, no one raised their phone. Nothing went viral. Nothing needed to. Now here you are, in your own chair, in your own life, far from gate C27. You weren't there that day. You didn't tee up a boarding pass or pull out a badge. You were not the one humiliated, and you were not the one holding the power over a person at a counter. But you have stood in lines. You have watched someone be treated differently. You have scrolled past shaky videos of injustice and thought, "That's awful," then moved on. So here's the question that lingers after the lights dim and the scene fades. When you find yourself at one of those everyday gates, at work, in a store, online, on a street, will you be the person who looks away, trusting whatever system is in front of you? Or will you be the one who pauses, who questions, who notices when a human being is being made small and chooses, in whatever small way you can, to stand beside them instead of above them? You don't need a badge to do that. You just need to decide, the next time you see someone's dignity hanging by a thin strip of paper, whether you will be another quiet tear in it, or one more pair of hands holding it together. And if that question makes you a little uncomfortable, maybe sit with it for a while. Maybe share it. Maybe talk about it with someone the next time you're waiting at a gate.